Okay, we're recording. Yeah, so welcome. Yeah, thanks. I guess many of you have been here already. I do these regularly. I like hearing myself talk. I don't know. I like sharing fun stuff that I like with people, I guess is the more generous to myself version. Um, so I just regularly do these and find some cool model that's like impacted my life. Sometimes I share, sometimes I have other people give a talk. So if it's your first time, welcome. Afterwards, the hot tub, pool's open, hang out, have fun. Yeah, relax. Last time, who was here last time for my last one? Okay, awesome, cool. So I did a model the last time called interaction styles, which is a part of the kind of an interlocking series of type models that I've found. Called the interstrength approach or interstrength models. They've all been like deeply impactful in me and my journey. And I did a lot of framing in that last talk that I'm not going to repeat for this one. So if you haven't watched the recording, there's a link to it posted in this event if you want to see it. You'll be able to follow today, no problem. It's a different model I'm going to cover today. It kind of intersects with that model. But last time I did a bunch of framing about like what are these models, how to use them, how to hold them, like all that stuff. So if that interests you, check out the last one. Today I want to cover a different model instead of the interaction styles model. Now, of course, my clicker's not working. Isn't that funny? Here we go. Today, there we go, is a model called Temperament, otherwise known as Essential Motivators. It's been renamed. One of the things I absolutely love about the theorist and my dear friend Linda behind this work is that she rebrands and renames things every few years to get the like perfect name, which makes it fucking impossible to talk about her work because there's a different name for it like every few years. So this used to be called Temperament. If you see the latest books, it's now called Essential Motivators. Has anyone been introduced to David Kersey's work on temperament theory by any chance? Anyone run into that before? So Linda was one of his students, and this is an evolution on his work and his models. If you're familiar with that. Anyone here familiar with the Myers-Briggs or MBTI? Right, okay, so this has connection points, but I will repeat this framing from the last time. If you're familiar with that, just set it aside for now. This is different. It's a different way of getting there, and it's a completely different way of holding type than you typically see in the Myers-Briggs world, which often turns me off a lot. So if you want to know more about that and what I don't like about the way type's normally done, check out the video from last time if you want to hear. Question?
Yeah, Myers-Briggs, especially when Kersey wrote the book,
Please Understand Me?
Please Understand Me, went through how there's 4 consistent archetypes or personality types that go back through all the Western psychology and Greek mythology and all of that. And I wonder whether the models that you showed last time tonight still maintain correspondence in that.
They do. The 4 patterns I'm going to introduce today go way back. The first known theorist to identify the 4 patterns was in ancient Greece. So this model goes way back. It's been iterated on, improved, evolved, but it's these patterns have been around for a while and they've been identified by many different theorists over centuries, which I think is really interesting. Cool. So last time, interaction styles was a model of like how we do what we do. Like they were very much energetic patterns of like how you show up and engage with others. This model gets deeper and more towards a why. So these are 4 patterns we're going to explore for kind of why we do what we do, going to like core psychological needs. Like if you're familiar with like Maslow's model or whatever, right, that's cool, but it just gets that like kind of psychological needs after you deal with the survival stuff and all that. But this model kind of looks at, there are different patterns of core psychological needs, and then a whole pattern that kind of materializes around them designed to help those needs get met. So we're going to look at those patterns today. And I want to start with just a little reflection for you, just something that we can then tie back to and use later. If you think about your best job or project of some sort, it doesn't have to be an official job, but think about like something that you loved, it felt so natural, so easy, like you were in your element, you were in your groove, like that kind of thing. And just reflect for a minute. what did you do that you loved doing, and what skills were required of you? Especially like meta skills, not like very specific, like, oh, I had to program in Java, but like, what is it about that? What is the meta skill there? Or what's the underlying thing? Why do you love that, or whatever it is? Just give you 20 seconds. Just identify one. I'll invite you to reflect on it as we go through the next several slides. Identify that. Okay, now switch gears. Think about your worst job or project. One you really hated, but especially when it's what did you have to do that you hated doing? Not just like, yeah, my boss was a jerk or whatever, but like the stuff where the work itself was awful. Something in the doing just made you miserable. And what skills were required of that? What did it force you to do that you hated doing? Reflect on that for a minute. All right. Got something in mind? Yeah, cool. Now I want to walk you through 4 talents and invite you to reflect on your best job, worst job, and see if you see any of these in any of these 4 talents. Got it? And jump in with questions anytime. So the first talent or skill set is tactics, or tactical skill set. People that are naturally gifted at this skill set, or what tactics is really about in this model, skillfully reading the situation, right, or people's expressions. Tactics is about what action do I take now to achieve a desired result. But it's about the act now. What action can I take right now in the current context, in the current environment, to move somewhere towards my goal, right? To do that, often you have to read the current situation, or sometimes expressions, body language, right? Like tuning in. It's Nick, do you mind if I out you a little bit here? Yeah, cool. Nick did some coaching sessions for a partner and I a while back, and like one of the things I noticed was just a subtle awareness of body language. Like it was like tuning in to like, wait, what's going on right there? What did you just do? Or what happened just then? Or whatever, right? And then like there was almost like an attunement to like, okay, what do we do right now? So often Nick would like shift something in the moment to achieve that result, right? I see this in, I had a guy I worked with in business that was like pretty genius at this. And he was a turnaround artist. So he would go into like companies that were failing miserably, right? Like tactical crisis. The company was going to be bankrupt in months, right? And they bring him in. I got to see him in action doing this once in a business I worked in. And he was just genius at like seeing what's going on in the current context, in the situation, and how do I immediately adapt to a change, right? And it was just, it was pretty amazing to watch. And he found opportunities for action, right? He had the goal in mind of what he was trying to do, and he was just constantly adapting, constantly reading the context skillfully and finding the way to adapt or change. And it was so present, right? Like sometimes I would talk to him about the shared project and be like, yeah, but, what about this thing like months from now? He's like, it doesn't fucking matter, right? Back to now. What do we do right now? Because none of that matters if we don't get through right now, right? And he was just so good at that. And then natural like problem solving comes from this, troubleshooting, right? How do I work around the obstacles? And that's what he just kept doing, right? Working around the obstacles. Anyone watch that old TV show 24? Yeah. 20, right? Yeah, seriously. Yeah. What I love about that, because it's showing this skill set of the main character in a physical environment. Like it can come out obviously in coaching, like for example with Nick, and business, but in a physical environment, that character is doing this tactical thing, right? It's like instantly reading and adapting to the physical environment around him all the time. So really good model for it. All right, so that's tactics. To use an example, I'm going to use World War II as an example. Tactics comes into play when you just landed on the beach in Normandy. The plan is shot to hell. Like things are flying all over the place. What do you do right now? Because you're trying to take that bunker, right? Like that's that like immediate adapting to the context. It's tactics. So think about your best job and worst job. Are there any elements of this in either of those that seem like a fit? Just reflection. And now let's talk about the next one, logistics. So logistics is about getting the right stuff to the right place, to the right people, in the right quantity, in the right quality, at the right time, and not to the wrong people, and doing it consistently with every detail attended to. That's logistics. Right? And sometimes those things are like physical. In the World War II example here, it's how do you get all the right ammo and food and fuel and all of that through these massive supply lines to make sure you've got the right shit to the right place at the right time, not to the wrong place, wrong people. And sometimes it's about information. I had a guy I worked with this skill set in my software company who was just really friggin' genius at attending to like, let's make sure the project is managed in a way where like all the right data gets to the right people in this big project that need it at the right time. And then dealing with all the details, he also dealt with our servers. Let's make sure all of the servers are like, they're patched, they're upgraded, they're updated, they have all the right permissions, and like all these details. I love playing with logistics. It's kind of it's not my primary skill set, but it's one I kind of find fun. So like for me, one of my things that I do for fun is accounting. Like I love to go like detailed bookkeeping, you know, like, yeah, it's like there's a logistics to that, or travel booking. My partners tend to like love this because I end up just booking all of their travel anywhere. They think I'm like doing something really, really generous for them. And in reality, I'm just playing, I'm just having fun, and they benefit from it. It's great. But yeah, I love that. Like, how can I get like my partners to the right place at the right time with all the details of how do I make sure they get a first class seat in there and like, you know, all this other stuff, right? So that is another example. It's often about structuring and standardizing so that happens, right? I have one guy in my current company came into our software team, which really lacked somebody with a lot of logistics until he showed up. It's like, oh my God, your procedures. No wonder you're getting like bugs happening here and there, server downtime, whatever. You don't have the right procedures in place to make sure this thing is safe and consistent and will continue on. So logistics is often about that. Again, the details, providing service. Sometimes there can be a real service aspect of this. And sometimes it's in the more people orientation, it comes out in attending to people's comforts, right? Taking care of, I have a family member that I think uses a lot of logistics. She's a nurse and really attends to the comforts of people, right? Just making sure they have the right medicine, the right whatever, like you just kind of see it in how she shows up. Okay, so that's logistics. Maybe reflect, is there anything in your best job or worst job? Anything you loved about doing this, like my accounting, or hated about doing this? All that damn detail work, whatever.
Like,
yeah.
You described kind of logistics though in a couple of different categories.
Yep.
Like if I have to do logistics like around like spreadsheets or numbers or anything, like I'll fall apart. But if it's about like caring for others, like I love thinking of all the details.
Yeah.
And so those things feel very different in that.
Totally. So what people find with this as a natural skill set is they tend to be good at it. Whether they want to do it is another matter. Right? Like sometimes people are really skilled at logistics and just don't want to do it in there. They don't like it. It doesn't feel fulfilling. People with the skill set though will find it very easy to do. On the other hand, when it's like maybe not your like best skill, like for me, this is not my like primary skill of these four. Often then it comes out in a specific area and not others. Like there are some areas I love to do deep. For me, it's the opposite. I love spreadsheets. I hate attending to people's comforts. I do not host. I hate it. I don't like it. It drives me nuts and I'm not good at it. Right? Like I just schedule events. You people show up and maybe bring food and I don't think to put out dishes or whatever. If you've seen those at past potlucks, that's all my assistant, Nicole. I don't do that. Right? Like so for me, it comes out in kind of a narrow way, which is often the case when you have some skill in it, but it's not your best skill set. My business partner, Rebecca, this is her top skill set, and watching her work is like watching friggin' Picasso or something. It's like she's a genius with details in every aspect, everything she touches, anytime. Like she just knows how to attend to them. Sometimes things I don't even think to think of. Categories I don't even think to think of. And she's got it all organized before I even ask. She runs all our trainings and like all the logistics stuff of my business. And it's just beautiful. Everything gets to the right place. Interestingly, it's often invisible. When logistics are done well, you don't see them. You see logistics when somebody fucks them up, right? When something isn't attended to. That's when you see them. When you go to a training and like you don't have like the right food, supplies, something, that's when you notice it. When everything's flawless, just a comfortable event. And logistics are visible when they're screwed up. And people that have this as a primary skill set often feel a little underappreciated because when they're doing their brilliance well, nobody notices. Compared to like tactics, you do tactics well and everybody fucking notices. You're a rock star and you look like it, right? When you do logistics well, it's invisible. Okay.
Like defense and soccer.
I know nothing about that. But I take your word for it. Cool. All right. So think about that. And let's talk about strategic skill set. So strategy in this definition, this is a specific definition, especially if you're used to business world definitions. This one, it's about the relationship between the means and the ends. And knowing the connection. What's the right means to achieve the ends? Right? What is the that kind of connection points? And often that's about knowing where to focus for the long term. In the World War II example, this is which beach do we land on, right? Like, and why? Where do we use paratroopers and why, right? It's that sense of like, what is the right means to achieve the ultimate goal? And often this means taking into account lots of possibilities. My long-term partner, Lex, this was her best skill set. And I loved watching that. Like she also started a couple businesses with me. And whenever I bring her something, like some big goal I've got, and I give her like, well, here's what I'm thinking, or what do you think? She'll just go into like all these unthought of angles of it. It's like she sees it from like 20 angles at once. And all of these possibilities and potentials of where that could go and what could go off. And it's just thorough like that. And the contingencies, like it's almost like in her head is an instant like breakdown flow chart of, well, wait a minute, but this could go to this or this or this or this. And if it goes there, then we can go here and here and here next. It's like this contingencies. And then complex patterns of influencing factors. It's the other thing I see. It's like she sees this web of like all of the things that influence the thing. It's a brilliant skill to watch in action. It's just like it's looking at this complex interwoven web and finding what makes sense now. Yeah.
Do you have a sense of like how to get better at strategic?
Practice.
How would you practice?
For me, it's about I find somebody who's really good at it and I work with them closely. And I just keep leaning on them. Like I got better at this through years of relating really closely with Lex, my life partner and business partner, who did this well. And just like, I like feel really proud and happy with like my strategy and something. And then she just rip it apart and like show me all these other ways and be like, okay, I learned a bit about how she thinks, right? And like got practice of that. That's kind of how I developed it. Yeah. So reflect. Anything here? Bit? What you loved? What you hated? And now let's talk about diplomacy. So the diplomatic skill set, here diplomacy, again, specific definition, it's about building bridges between people. It's not necessarily the negotiation diplomacy that we think of it in a political sense. It's actually usually not that. In fact, usually that takes tactics. Here it's about this like deep connection, unifying people by finding the deep underlying unifying threads. Right? How are we all alike? And yet, how are we all unique in our alikeness? There's almost a paradox built into good diplomatic skill set. It helps everyone find and feel unique, and it unifies us together as one by doing that. It's a fascinating thing, right? It's often by looking at those, what are those deeper issues? You know, what's the deeper purpose that binds us together here? Or what's the deeper commonality of just being human or in this community or whatever? Those of you who know Sarah Ness, she does this beautifully in a community setting, and I see her doing that all the time. Right? It's like she can't turn it off. It's like her brilliance is this diplomacy of unifying and building bridges. Often this means having empathy. To really build bridges between people, it's going into their world. What's it like to walk in their shoes? I'm really getting good at that. It can also be about interpreting unspoken meanings, interests, and tensions, right? So that you can kind of like find, where are we already alike? Where are we already the same? and reveal that. And clarify that. Clarify what are the values or the mission or the purpose that like brings us together. And ultimately, in the World War II example, diplomacy is about how do we not have a World War III, right? Or maybe more specifically, afterwards, the healing that's needed, right? Between these peoples and in these cultures. I have friends that are German in Germany that talk about doing that work and like healing from like all of the shit that happened back then. And like what they've done to kind of try to like heal and bring people together that were torn apart back in that era. So that's diplomacy. Reflect on that. Any see yourself in that in your best job or worst job? This is an interesting one too, and I should call out. There's a lookalike here that comes from development. Often people that are drawn to communities like authentic relating or circling or like any of these more like spiritual post-conventional like communities will often resonate with this coming from a developmental sense, whatever their core skill set. So just be aware that there is a lookalike there. It's often just coming from like when you hit that, for those of you who are at my stages talk, which is another model, when you hit that like space where you suddenly get really aware of interiors, of like these interior parts of self and different contexts and all that, that can look like this. It's different. It's a different thing, but there's a lookalike there. So just to call that out. Cool. Okay, so I'm going to talk about the 4 temperament patterns or essential motivator patterns now. Each one has one of these that tends to be their strongest skill set. The pattern's more than just this, but this is a good start just to kind of give you some data to like reflect on and feel into.
So is this all, there's only 4 skill sets and these are the 4?
In this model, yeah. This model looks at 4 skill sets, and we're going to talk about 4 temperament patterns. Each one tends to have one of these skill sets as its strongest. Come on in, make yourself comfortable.
Brian, I don't know if you want to take questions.
Yeah, please.
So I really like these 4 skill sets. They make a lot of sense. They're very high level. They're very abstract. When I think about people I know in the real world, like a lot of people in this room, I can sort of in my head map to this.
Yep.
But then I think about, there's a lot of people who are very procedural. I'm like, okay, well, technically speaking, maybe it's logistical,
Maybe.
but it's very concrete. I feel like a bureaucrat, right? Like somebody who works for the Texas State.
That very well might be
I take out
logistical.
this form, HB 7432. You filled out 5739. Oh, you forgot this one. Like, I guess that's.
So logistics would be the art of creating processes like that actually work, which may not be the ones that are actually in place in those bureaucracies, or about the skill of navigating them. So I use logistics to navigate the fuck out of government systems. Like I'm good at that. I'm good at working the system to get something out of it, right? That's a logistical intelligence. And I'm pretty good at defining logistical processes when I need to. It's not my core skill set though, right? Versus diplomacy is my core skill set. Like that, I can't help but do it. It's like breathing. It's just effortless. It doesn't even seem like a skill. This is often true of people's most innate skill set here. It often doesn't seem like a thing. It seems like that's just like breathing. Doesn't everyone do that? And it's no big deal, right? But everyone doesn't do that. And it is a big deal if you talk to the people near you. Like I look at the way my business partner, Rebecca, does logistics. And to me, it's genius. And her biggest like complaint is like, I don't have any like really strong, I don't get to do the cool, sexy stuff, in the business. And everyone around her is like, you're genius, like absolutely genius with this stuff. And she's like, oh, that's no big deal. That's just like, everyone does that, right? Like it's her innate thing. She's learned that that's not actually true, but like, it's really interesting to see just how easy it is for her. I feel like that with diplomacy, it's easy. Logistics takes work for me. That's not my biggest skill set. I really resonate with it. I love it. Whereas tactics, I'm fucking helpless. Like, there are times where like, I'll like drop or spill something while I'm cooking or whatever. And like, I just kind of stare at it. I'm like, fuck. Like something's burning, like literally this has happened. Something is on fire over here. And I'm like, shit, it's on fire, right? Until somebody else around me just springs into action and like starts acting now to like deal with the result we need right now, right? Like I'm just shit at that. It's like, or earlier today, my TV didn't work. So I'm like, shit, I start staring at the TV. And I'm like, okay, what do I do? Like, and it takes me a huge amount of effort to like actually get into the tactical intelligence of how do I adapt? What do I do with this? How do I not just stare at the TV for the next 10 minutes, right? Like that's not working. That takes effort for me, a lot of effort. strategy is pretty easy for me. It's like logistics. So often people find there's one that's like effortless, like breathing, one that is a blind spot, although sometimes they don't see it in themselves as a blind spot. Talk to your friends. And then often two that are like, yeah, moderate. That's a typical pattern for most people. Okay, so let's talk about the temperament patterns. We're going to look at 4 here. I'm gonna go through each one in more depth. Oops. Oh shit. There we go. But just to name the 4 that we're looking at: improviser, stabilizer, theorist, and catalyst. We're gonna go through these. Each one has a talent set that tends to be core for it, and a different set of core needs, which is what the pattern is built around. So let's go through them. Ready? Kind of see if you find yourself in any of these, or maybe somebody you care about. Let's start with improviser. So with improviser, I love the graphics. They go with the pattern so well in this. There is, the need is to be free to act now, free to follow the impulse to act now in the current context on the environment. It is death to an improviser to feel like they have absolutely no freedom to act. Right? That sucks. When they start feeling really constrained and like they just can't have action and they can't make an impact, right? That is death. Impact is so important for people with this pattern, right? They want to be able to have a result, have an impact, change something. Right? And that makes skillful performance often really important here. I want to like perform skillfully. I have some friends in theater that this is their best fit pattern, and like talking to them about what they love it's that impact of a show done well, and then the skillful performance of putting it on so that it comes off and like makes a difference. I have other examples. Let's see. I mean, it can show up in any way. Nick, do you have anything where you see this? This is your best fit.
Absolutely. Sexually.
I
I feel like death if I do not perform extremely well. That's one of the main ways it shows up in my life right now.
Awesome.
Also, like if I'm not like the top or like the top sales or the top, like in every job, I've always worked for commission, always, and I know that's where I work best because I can do now. I will not work for corporate because there's always too many rules. I work for small shops when I was a mechanic because I can work the way that I need to work because it's the way I'm going to have
Biggest impact.
I need to have now.
Totally. That reminds me of my friend Laura, who works with me, also improviser, and she once like said she really missed being a waitress because then you got tips and you knew immediately how well did you do. You had a score for every customer, and she was focused on that. Like she went right to like, what tip did I get here, and what can I do to maximize that? Right? She loved the feedback, telling her what her impact was, and so then she started trying to put that in place in my business. Like, how can I get constant scores of some sort so that I know the impact I'm having, right? Because not being able to see and just doing work that it just goes out there and you're like, she has no idea. So she would always go to our customers, talk to them. She wanted to be in touch with the impact of her work, right? And she wanted to be free to like actually act on it and do what made sense to her. That was so critical.
I feel like that's true in facilitation. Like, not all facilitators are improvisers, but the way I like to facilitate is definitely that way.
Yeah.
And if I have to facilitate or teach something and I have to do like, this is what you have to teach in this way, then I'm like,
right? Yeah, I'll see facilitators of all 4 styles, but they each have a very different flavor, right? Often the improviser facilitators they're colorful, they're bold, they're I don't know, they're fun. There's just something there. There's an impact that's just in the way they lead a room or whatever. You also see.
I kind of think about the improviser like specifically when it comes to like a jazz musician versus a classical musician. So classical musicians play what's on the page.
Yeah.
And there's little to no vibrato in their strings. Like it's very straight. It's very rigid. Whereas I'm a jazz saxophone player by trade, and the way that I'll look at something, I don't even read music that well compared to a classical musician.
Wow.
But you just play.
Yeah.
And you're not constrained.
You
instead of seeing a series of notes, you
Yeah.
just see a chord symbol, which
Totally.
just tells you what general material you could play over that particular chord symbol.
Area.
That would sound
Cool.
to hear.
Yeah, awesome. There's often like, I hear with improvisers, there's often a sense of oneness with the current context, right? And then like flowing and adapting. There was a cool story I read written by an improviser who ran an old planetarium, but like a manual one, not one run by a computer. So he had like giant equipment. And he just talked about like feeling completely one during the performance with this equipment. Like it was an extension of him, every knob, every lever, right? And like, he would just flow in a oneness with the context. I hear that from some musician improviser friends of mine as well. It's like just a oneness with the experience going on right now in the context. Right? And then a varying it, adapting. Variation is key. You rarely will see an improviser doing the same thing over and over again. But generally, boredom is akin to psychological death for improvisers. Like this is the style that most hates boredom of the four by far. And there's a real focus on aesthetics here. There tends to be a value in aesthetics and like an attunement to aesthetics. Watching Nick at Ecstatic Dance is like this great example of like just improviser, like current context, flow, aesthetics, variety, variations. It's enough to make me feel like, holy shit, this is so not my best fit. And I don't know how you do it, and it's amazing. Okay, let's add some more. Troubleshooting is often a focus in this style. Action, this is an incredibly action-oriented style, right? They tend to go look for what is the opportunity to act now. And they're often acting sometimes before others are even like ready for them to act. That's a common issue with improvisers here. Kind of like, I almost feel like with my improviser friends I work with, I really try to like focus them. Like one of them often jokes, he's like a laser, like point him somewhere and like, he's gonna act, he's gonna have an effect. But if you don't point him somewhere, he's gonna shoot in fucking random directions before you're ready for it, right? Like that's just what he does. He acts constantly, he changes things, he has an impact. So that's that. Adaptability is key. And what's next, right? Like this is one of the most common like focuses for people with this best fit pattern. It's like, just the attention is like, whatever was is done. What's next? And there's a constant focusing on, great, that's done, now what? Rarely do they get stuck and hooked on the past. And I mean, everyone has their shadow shit, but like generally the attention here is just constantly going towards present and what's next. And very present oriented. Of all four styles, this one tends to be most grounded in the present. And they tend to have a tactical talent.
What's the correlation between these, what are calling this set and the tactical? Is it pretty high?
Yeah. People with the tactical talent as their best fit talent, it's a 1-to-1 here. So, I mean, that said, people can develop a lot of tactical talent and have something else even more. There's like my partner Lex, this is not her best fit pattern. She's really good at tactics. It's not her core skill, but she's really good at it, right? And she looks a lot improviser sometimes. People with improviser as a best fit pattern are really good at tactics. You can't not be with this as an orienting pattern. Like if your core needs are for the freedom to act now and having an impact, you're going to develop tactical skill. Right? Okay, so that is improviser. Let's look at the next one. Stabilizer. So stabilizer, people with a stabilizer pattern have a hunger for responsibility. They want responsibility. It's like, they're almost the one that can't ignore it. If a responsibility isn't getting done, like it irks them. This is my partner Rebecca's best fit. And it's funny, whenever there's something that needs to get done in the business, and it's not her job, but it's nobody's job. It's like she's distracting as hell. She's like constantly focused on it. It's like this thing on the table that like she can't look away from, and it's like, she just ends up doing it. Somebody needs to be responsible for that. And they're often seeking responsibility. I was shocked when she joined my company. She just kept taking on more and more responsibility, kept looking for it, kept wanting it, right? It was just load me up was kind of the energy. The danger often with stabilizers is they end up overburdened with too much responsibility. is they suck it up constantly. But it's feeding. It's a core need here, responsibility. And part of that is to a group. So membership becomes really important, right? The responsibility to a community or a group or a family or whatever it is, right? There's got to be somebody you're responsible to, and it becomes a membership thing. Right? I'm a responsible member of this. I contribute. I want to contribute. Make a contribution. And they are so fucking reliable. I love that about stabilizers. When Rebecca takes something on, I know that you can count on it. She's going to attend to the details and it's going to get handled. Right? So damn reliable. And that tends to be a value often for stabilizers. It's my improviser friend, Laura, brilliant at executing tactical stuff. I'll give her projects that are like out there and she'll just make them happen. It's not always the most reliable person I work with. She's good. It's not unreliable, but it's not Rebecca level reliability. And I always love watching how much that irks Rebecca. Meanwhile, Laura's getting lots of cool shit done. She's out there executing, getting things done, but every detail isn't always attended to. And sometimes, she flakes out by going on to something next or another project or whatever. And man, Rebecca's like, you didn't finish this thing right here? Like, there's a reliability challenge sometimes. So improvisers and stabilizers can have some interesting dynamics between those two patterns, right? And traditions become really important for stabilizers. There's a desire to know that the world will go on, right? My group will go on without me. So often they're the ones really attuning to the value of tradition, something reliable, regular, that you can count on and it's going to be there. And they tend to focus on preserving assets, preserving traditions, preserving the community. Focus. And they help others do these things too. They can really help others get in and feel that membership, right? Be responsible, take on something for the group. Generally, stabilizers want things to be useful. They tend to be really practical minded. And they want things to be useful. They want things to have a clear use for some kind of utility. Kind of bugs stabilizers to see lots of waste around, something that's not useful. Rebecca's just regularly hunting out waste in our company. Service is a big thing. Rebecca takes on all this work in my company, but then whenever I call her and she's not working, half the time she's like, oh yeah, I'm volunteering at the community, whatever, or I'm donating platelets or something else that she's just always doing something to be of service to someone or something around her. It's almost like she can't turn it off. There's just a natural desire to be of service. Except for when she goes on vacation. And this is often true with stabilizers where they are so fucking dutiful that they get this sense of I fucking deserve a vacation, And so when they do, they know how to turn it off, go be on a beach and just chill, right? Because they know they're responsible. And so it facilitates that kind of thing sometimes. And duty, right? Doing their duty. The psychological death for a stabilizer is to feel like you've been irresponsible and you've let your community down. Right? Or you've been ostracized by the group. You're outside of the membership. That's the equivalent of the improviser is feeling bored, they can have no impact and no freedom to act. Yeah.
So are stabilizers tending to be less adaptable and imaginative?
No, I wouldn't say that at all. They're not as focused on the tactical in the moment adapting as the improvisers are, but stabilizers can be incredibly creative with how they do these things and incredibly adaptable. Now they do tend to focus on preserving what's there. So it's often stabilizers that recognize the value of the processes, traditions, the things that have been there. But when they don't work, they're often the first ones that want to change it. When that existing bureaucracy is not serving, not useful, not helping the purpose, a well-developed, intelligent stabilizer is often the first one to say, this process isn't working, it needs to be changed. But it is done with a certain caution. It's done with a certain, why is that there? Right? We've been doing it that way for some reason. Let's make sure we understand the reason before we go changing everything all the time. And so there's often a sense of preserving and connecting to the past. Stabilizers tend to be very tuned into the past. whereas the improviser tends to have a very present orientation. The stabilizer is tuned into the past. Why have we done things this way? Right? There's a journey that got us here that's meant something. What is the reasons for that, right? So there's a past orientation, but that doesn't mean they're in any way inflexible. They can be when they're immature, right? Like immature improvisers can be irresponsible. Immature stabilizers can be really rigid and inflexible. Mature improvisers are not irresponsible at all. They're freaking brilliant tacticians that get shit done and make things happen and vary and adapt, and like, it's brilliant. Really good stabilizers can be the ones improving all those bureaucratic processes into actual efficient, lean, mean, effective, useful processes, or anything else that's attending to all the details that need to be attended to. So that's stabilizer. Logistical talent is what goes with this pattern. They tend to naturally to get that met, logistics. Let's talk about theorists. So I like the image for this one. Theorists, core need, knowledge and competence. I learned really early on in my relationship with Lex, theorist is her best fit. She did something, what was it? You know when you are going into a car door and somebody like unlocks the door right as you're opening the handle and then it doesn't unlock, right? She did that. And I just looked at her and said, "Oh, you did the dumb thing." And she just looked at me like, what did you fucking just say to me? Like, I mean, you would have thought I kicked her freaking dog at that point, right? Like, the dumb thing. I just called something she did the dumb thing. And I learned very early, don't do that. Do not insult a theorist's knowledge or competence. Don't call them stupid. It really doesn't go well. The core need here is for that knowledge, that competence, right? That. And mastery and self-control, the other parts of the core needs. And the sense of mastery, of willpower, right? God, theorists have insane amounts of willpower. I learned this, my new partner also is her best fit as theorist. And I learned very quickly, fortunately in the past, I already knew this lesson, don't try to out-willpower her, right? Like if I'm like playing some kind of power game or something and like trying to hold out something, she's just got more willpower than I can ever muster. And she will last longer because it's this deep core need of, no, I will have more willpower than anything you can dish out, right? So lesson learned. There's a search for understanding here. Search for wanting knowledge. Again, it goes back to that, right? How do I understand something? Insights and ideas. Theorists dwell in the world of insights and ideas all the time. It's just such a natural energy. They're often the one asking why, over and over and over again. Why? Wanting to get at that deeper concept of the why of things. Logical consistency is so clear. I get called out by, I work with a lot of theorists. I get called out all the time if I give an argument that's not logically consistent. Or by saying something like I just did, like all the time, I can just hear the theorists I work with jumping in and saying, well, not all the time, right? Like they're very precise with language theorists. Not all the time. You just said always. That's not actually true, right? Like it's really hard for me to adjust that in my language, but it's one of the fastest ways I know to turn off a theorist. It's just use broad, global, sweeping statements that aren't precise and like what you're trying to convey, and that's really off-putting, and it tends to leave them not trusting me. So I have to constantly counteract for that when I know I'm working with one of my theorists and say, okay, not all the time. And I don't actually mean all the time. I'm just talking with dramatic language, right? So yeah, there's a focus on progress and improvement here, especially of the ideas, the conceptual, the competence, the systems. They tend to be natural systems thinkers, right? Tend to focus on the design of systems, design of theory even. Right? Theorists often have theories and theories of theories, and right, and work with these like complex strategic systems at play. The strategic talent goes with this style. So that's theorism. Yeah.
So does a theorist by nature value competence in all things, or only in the things that they theorize are important?
They value competence in themselves and anything that they choose to exercise competence in. As an example, my partner Lex plays a lot of video games, but she hates getting into new games because she feels incompetent at them for a while. So she has just a few go-to games, really resists whenever I try to get her to play a new game, right? She really wants that feeling of mastery of the game, right? In fact, she actually likes playing on the easier difficulty modes than I do because she wants to feel like she has just mastered that game. And, you know, she feels dumb when I crank up the difficulty and like, she doesn't like that at all.
Theorists will resign themselves from certain spheres of activity because I'm not going to manage to do that. I'm leaving that to others.
Yeah, totally. Yeah.
Is it the same thing with knowledge, that they'll
Mhm.
selectively choose to become masters in certain areas and then be completely comfortable with ignorance in others?
Yeah, absolutely. Yep, totally. It's just their chosen fields or focus. So my new partner, Jess, theorist, best fit. She was sorting for a while between improviser and theorist because there's a lot of both patterns are visible. She's developed a lot of improviser. One of the things I helped her get clear on was like, all right, think back one to your earlier life, because often we develop later in life other skills, right? So think back earlier. She's like, oh, I was a total nerd in school. Now she's not a nerd at all. You never know. But she's like, I'm a total dork in school, which often, I hate to say it, goes with theorists. Not that all theorists are nerds, but a lot of theorists are nerds when they're younger before they develop counterbalancing skills. And she's got a PhD in physics. She's just like, and then she was eventually joking, laughing. She looked around at her living room and said, yeah, I've got like a copy of Physics Today on my coffee table and like something on like, I don't know, atomics, something or other theory, whatever, some kind of all these random scientific things. Often theorists are just really love the sciencey stuff. Not all. I mean, some of them are into other stuff, but there's something about that way of thinking, right? That attunement theorists tend to like. I saw an XKCD book sitting on her in her bathroom, and if that's not a sign of a likely theorist, I don't know. That's a total stereotype, but that often goes with the type. Just saying.
Yeah, I was gonna say it's interesting they said that it's correlated with the improviser because I identify with a lot of theorist stuff, but as a function to my improvising.
Yeah.
Like the more I can recognize the wider web of things, the less I have to think.
Yeah.
I'm actually moving.
So the in-charge improviser tends to develop, theorist is like the developmental side and vice versa. So like you end up with those two kind of like each growing more towards the other. Like Lex, my partner Lex, theorist is her best fit, but she really looks improviser now. You know, same thing with Jess, who was searching between the two, like so much similarity. Not true with all of the theorists and improvisers, but the in-charge improviser or the chart the course improviser, either one tends to develop into kind of more of a theorist standpoint, and same with the in-charge and chart the course theorists tend to develop more looking like an improviser. So those two kind of go that way.
Is that like a theorist getting to the level of unconscious competence that lends itself naturally to improvising?
It's only two of the interaction style theorists that do that. It's only the in-charge, from the last model, from the last talk, it's only the in-charge and chart the course theorists that tend to develop and look improviser.
We got 4 subgroup, what are they?
Yep, 4 interaction styles that go with these 4 temperaments.
Okay, in charge.
In charge is one of them, chart the course is one of them. This is the stuff from last time. So the get things going and behind the scenes theorists tend to look more like stabilizers and develop more in that direction. Yeah.
I really identify with that. I really appreciate you saying that because I definitely I'm going to self-categorize as a theorist. I'm highly confident. And but it's interesting because I've got older.
Yeah.
The improviser thing is really starting to show up.
Mm-hmm.
Because at the end of the day, I'm kind of like, dude, like you gotta get shit done. Like you gotta get out of the books.
Yeah, totally. I almost feel embarrassed sharing the next one, which is my best fit, because at this point in my life, I'm like, that's just like boring and simple, right? Like, because at this point in my life, I'm way into developing in other areas, but it's still so core. The one that is the best fit, like even as you develop into others, it still is colored majorly by the flavor of that core pattern, right? When I see the way Lex looks improviser, it's not the same as when I look at actual natural improvisers. It's in that direction, but it's colored by the core in a major way. Same thing when I see improvisers that develop into theorists, like into that pattern of that skill set, right? That energy, you still see the improviser at the root of it so strongly. even as they take on other things. Okay, let's talk about the last one, catalysts. So catalysts have a core need for a unique identity. So the catalyst is often the self in search of itself, which is kind of ironic, because if they ever found themselves, they'd have a big fucking problem on their hands, right? Now it's like, well, wait a minute. It's the game is in the inquiry, is in the search for the unique identity. But there's a real need for that. Like my whole thing with Lex of saying you did the dumb thing, right? One of the worst things she could say to me is something like, you're just like everyone else, or something like that, right? Like I find myself telling my new partners this all the time. Like I was just talking this about Jess. I'm like, look, I want to feel special, right? I need to feel like I am completely unique to you, right? In some way, like you can have other partners, whatever, but like I need this to be like something needs to feel like you get my unique identity, and that makes this entire relationship unique and special in some major way, right? Unique identity is really important. And there's an irony here too, because this style often is focused on unifying people. And it's that unique identity in unity. That's that paradox again that goes with the diplomatic skill set, which is core to this type. Meaning and significance is, a big thing here. It's, there's a kind of almost a stereotype joke. You ask a catalyst, what do you want in a relationship? And the answer is something like, deep and meaningful relationship, or something like very abstract language, which goes with the style as well. But the focus here on meaning and significance is major for this type. It's like wanting something that is meaningful. It's part of what I mean when I'm like, I want a special relationship. I want something meaningful, significant, deep. It's very abstract, and like if you ask me to define it further, I can't tell you. It's just like a feeling. I just want that. I don't know. There's often a like making things meaningful. I was in partnership with another catalyst like me for the past year or so, and one of the things I loved about that relationship is like any random thing we did somehow would like be imbued with this deep meaning. Like, we just got stuck in that parking lot. Wow, like that was so meaningful in these ways, and it like meant this thing to us, and like, like we would just make this like meaningful depth of significance out of it. And it felt so fucking good to like actually be able to do that with somebody and like get that need constantly met. Right? Like, and it was the dumbest shit sometimes that like we could somehow make like into the most meaningful stuff ever, and when I'm in relationship with non-catalysts, they actually tend to appreciate that about me a lot. I can imbue even the ordinary with some sense of meaning and significance and specialness. And I sure make them feel meaningful, significant, special, and like I see their unique identity. It's one of the most common things I hear from partners. They feel seen in a really deep way in their uniqueness, not just seen in their actions or their emotions in the moment. I don't usually get that compliment. That's not my skill, but but in their unique identity, man, I see them. Right? They tend to value empathic relationships, which are like the kind where you really get the other's identity. You know what it's like to be them. You can kind of take on their sense of self even in some ways. Really strong focus here on human potential often, right? On helping others develop their full potential. In fact, they can tend to have a development or a growth bias here, of almost like pushing more towards that. I had to be careful early in my journey in business. I would tend to focus so much on seeing the potential in somebody that I'd kind of miss the details, like they're fucking up the work really bad right now and hurting the business. And I'd be focused on like, but they've got so much potential. We just need to mentor them some and it's gonna be great. I do that in fucking relationships too. I'm like, this relationship has so much potential, right? And like, if she could only like develop in some way, this would be great. And like, yeah. Meanwhile, it's usually one of my improviser or stabilizer friends who brings me back to the pragmatic, practical, right side. The improvisers tend to be really pragmatic, and the stabilizers really practical. Subtle distinction, but close, right? They'll bring me back and be like, "Wait a minute, this person's fucking up the business. Like, what the hell? Deal with this, right?"
What was your distinction between stabilizers and stabilizers?
Pragmatic So the improviser tends to be really pragmatic, really almost utilitarian. Like, what's the utility of this to get the job done? What do we need to do now? Like, really almost matter of fact, pragmatic, versus the stabilizer has a real practical orientation. So the two can be very similar, but there's a definite difference in how those two show up. Okay, authenticity is a big thing. You name a movement authentic relating and you're going to attract tons of freaking catalysts, and that is my experience in authentic relating community. There is a disproportionate number of catalysts attracted to this work. That's not to say everyone attracted to this work is a catalyst. That's not true. But there is a lookalike there. So you might find anyone attracted to general consciousness work is going to look more catalyst, even if that's not their best fit. So watch out for that. Like, that was one of the first things I was helping Nick sort through. And Nick was like, I think catalyst might be a fit at first. And I'm like, are you sure? Right? Like, dig in. Because part of the reason I was instantly skeptical was just knowing there's so many lookalikes for people that are exploring like the edges of their development and consciousness into like AR and stuff like that. It's just a risk. You know, there's a lookalike there. And the community around these kind of movements often has kind of a catalyst bias, right? Which can get really annoying sometimes to either non-catalysts or those of us catalysts that have developed past our own biases. Thank you. Right? Like, I really drives me nuts how like sometimes in these movements you get this like total bias towards like authenticity and potential and growth, and I'm like, can we just fucking do something, build something, create something? Yeah. Like, you know, like, so I'm often looking for like the subset in those movements that are actually bringing that in, and what I often find is the friggin' stabilizers and improvisers in those movements, and theorists sometimes, although they're kind of like off in their own little theory world sometimes. But like, those are often the people I connect with because they're the ones that are also getting sick of the bias of these communities. Although there are also catalysts like me that are like, been there, done that, want to now, like, let's get real with it. Yeah.
Or this might just be all you saying. Think you're a catalyst, you're not. I'm unique.
Right? Yeah, totally. Yeah. I can be the only one. You guys can't be. Right? Yeah, totally. Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah. But then another part of me is like, but we can be catalysts together, and like, this is cool. No, I want like the unity as well. Like, that's the other part of this, right? They tend to be very encouraging. Catalysts can be incredibly supportive, encouraging of your growth and development and path. Unless you're stuck somewhere, then like they can get a little annoying. But as long as you're growing and developing, catalysts can be incredibly encouraging for that. They tend to have a focus on ideals. David Kersey, who was one of the predecessors to this lineage, called them the idealist, was the name of this pattern, because they tend to focus on some set of ideals and kind of hold and try to orient around ideals. So much so that one of the potential downsides is getting lost in the practical realities in the ideals. It's usually with development that they find a way to keep themselves grounded. Early in life, often catalysts tend to get lost in the ideals and the vision part, and not as much in the grounding. What do you think? Can be values, can be like, what is the idealized perfect version of something, right? Like, what's the idealized perfect version of community, right? Or of anything, of circling or whatever. There's like kind of a natural attunement to this idealized version of something, and then looking at that, right? Unity, I mentioned that, tends to be a focus, and growth, tend to be really growth oriented. With the diplomatic talent to serve, building bridges between people, unifying and finding uniqueness and difference.
We say more about when the catalyst is encouraging can be annoying.
Yeah, it's more that like, I don't think it's encouraging that's annoying. It's more, catalysts sometimes have a bias when it feels like somebody is not introspecting, looking at themselves, growing. When somebody is not prioritizing growth, maybe they're prioritizing something else important though, like getting something done or whatever. Or maybe they've just got their own shadow or bias or blind spot. But often catalysts, when you are focused on seeing yourself and growing, they're your biggest allies. When you're stuck somewhere, sometimes they can get a little arrogant about it or wanting you to see where you were stuck, right? And that can turn annoying sometimes. Yeah, cool. That's Catalyst. So, see yourself in any of these? See people you like? Some stuff to reflect on. Let me add one last little piece that might help you sort out some stuff. And oh yeah, please go for it.
You made this point about, you know, certain of the types are sort of, I'm sure there's a specific name for it, but develop like one of the other talents you were talking about, the theorist, becoming one supervisor, and the inverse of that, at least for two of the sun from before you talked about last time. How does it tend to, like, is there a pretty strong relationship there? Like, okay, if you're a can-do theorist, in general, your development pattern looks like bolting on an improviser skill.
There's another model that actually looks at like a map of likely development path and shadow for each of the types. But it's different for each of the full types, the interaction style times temperament, right? So full 16 type patterns. But yes, it is, and it's pretty predictable. And it's a really cool model.
Can you use it as a diagnostic tool on yourself? Like, okay, you're pretty confident you're this and this, and it kind of shows you where you are.
Yeah, I don't usually recommend that as a way to find yourself. You can if you really know the models, but if you really know the models, then you're already there. If you're working with somebody that really knows the models, they can use that to help you, right? That's something I often use, right, to help.
Does that construct allow for trauma or the effects of?
Yeah, what often happens when people have especially early life trauma, if it's not safe to develop their core style, they'll develop something else as a coping mechanism and then often come back to the core a little bit later. So sometimes you have things like that happen. It's especially common with the interaction styles model, where like if you grow up where it's not safe to express yourself and your natural interaction style is get things going or in charge, which are more expressed, and you're in an environment where that's fundamentally not safe, often they'll look more behind the scenes or chart the course. They'll develop those as like coping mechanisms, and later we'll find the natural one coming out more. Yeah, just things like that. Yeah.
Are there ways to like, how do you know if you were stunted like before you remember?
It's usually not just once early for that kind of pattern. It's like throughout childhood, or at least a big chunk of childhood. See that. Yeah.
Do these categories have a secondary inclination?
I don't know what you mean by secondary.
In other words, do catalysts?
Oh, it depends on the full type. So yes, but I can't tell you just from this. Like the get things going catalyst has a different developmental side than the in charge catalyst does. So you have to know the interaction style plus this to know the map of what the other stuff is.
Yeah. And I know we're both the CGU questions. In my mind, I'm mapping this to the MBTIs, right? Because
I'll get there. I mean,
it's a pretty clear map, at least in my head, about how, at least I'm sure, highly correlated between the four core.
Yeah, it's a direct correlation. Yes.
And this is an F.
No, this. Yeah. Let me get there. No, that's not true. But let me get there. Yeah, cool. Okay, so one other thing that I want to point out, I'm going to post a link to the books, same books I posted in the last one in the Facebook event. If you get the books, one of the things you'll see, and it's a really good tool for like sorting out for yourself, is these targets. You'll see one for each pattern, and it's a great way to get just a quick visual. So I encourage you, if you get the book, to like explore through that as another way of seeing, not just reading the descriptions, but looking at these. So for example, I'm not going to go through all these in depth, but this is the improviser. And you'll see this is it, right? So core needs at the center and everything else around there. These are more core, these are less core. And they're connected. So as you look at these, like improviser has a desire, ability to make an impact, which often goes with their language. So improvisers, this is one of the reasons, like my new partner Jess actually looked really improviser. Every other fucking word was fucking like that, right? Like, or something like that. Like, although I have a good friend many years who's an in-charge improviser, and like we've all joked well before we knew these models about him. We all joked that he could like conjugate the verb fuck and like use it in any context to mean almost anything. And like his language was all like, it was colorful. It was like impactful. It was one of my biggest clues when I was chatting with Tia at first, and she was sorting through this. Like I couldn't help but notice the language had an impact. Like just the colorful language, like you see that with improvisers all the time. The language has impact. It's bold, it's colorful, it's often a lot of curses in there. You know, and these all go together in different ways. If you have the desire of freedom to act now as a core need, you're probably going to develop a behavior that looks like you're reacting quickly, right? Often they go together. You know, if you value fraternal relationships, then likely one of the behaviors you'll see, and you do a lot of improvisers, is reciprocating, right? Like they are really attuned to that, the value of like, hey, let me in turn reciprocate whatever it was you just did. I got your back. Because that helps to really build the kind of fraternal relationships that improvisers really love, right? So this is just I love these ways of getting like the overall like look all together. And when you do look, if you look at these and follow up, one of the cool things too, interpret each of them in the context of all of the words on here. So it's not just somebody that likes fraternal relationships. It's somebody that likes fraternal relationships and is really good at tactics, loves variety, has a freedom to act now, really values aesthetics, excitement, and stimulation. That gives you a sense of the kind of fraternal relationship. And somebody that values excitement and stimulation is a crisis manager, performs that kind of fraternal relationship. Right? So that kind of gives you like a whole word cloud to like associate all the words with each other and get a whole picture of the pattern, which I love. And you have one of these for each of the core types. So I'm not going to go through those with you in depth right now.
Are these graphics in the book?
Yeah, they're in the book. That's what I
You still scroll
call your
through them
attention.
so they're in the video.
What's that?
We still scroll through them so they're in recording.
Oh, sure. Yeah, there we go. Now you can watch them in the recording and save your $12 on a book.
You're still gonna get the book.
Excellent, good. They're my friend's books, so I like to help her out. Okay, that's theorist, and here's our catalyst. Global language for catalyst. That's my like always never. I have a joke with my theorist partners now that they use precise language. Global language is like dramatic, big, like it's always, never, things like that. But we have a translation joke where, for me, a catalyst always is like a theorist 60% of the time, right? Like that's about the translation, right? When I say always, I mean more often than not by a little to a theorist, right? Right? When I say usually, I mean like it happens occasionally, like to a theorist, that's like, 1 in every 4 or 5 times, like that at least, that's my usually. When I say sometimes, that means it's happened once and I've made a pattern out of it, right? Like that's just the translation between global language and her precise language. So anyway, it's fun to look at some of these and how they cross connect. Okay, so this is the other last piece I wanted to show you. Oops, there we go. So this is another way of sorting out between them for yourself. And this is actually one of the biggest dynamics that you see in just human relating, I think, in general. The difference between abstract and concrete language, right? So a simple way to think about this is like, imagine you were going to describe my house to somebody afterwards. How would you describe my house?
Big.
Cool. What else? Stone. Huh?
Fur.
What was that?
Modern.
Modern. Okay, cool. Now notice the difference, right? So stone, big, those are concrete. They're specific descriptors, right? They're indicative, they're literal, they're observations, they're right there. Whereas modern is a concept, a symbol. It doesn't give you a direct visual image. It gives you a sense, a style. Like that's an abstract language quality. And I'd say it feels really warm. That's abstract language. It's open, abstract language. It's hard for me when I have to actually find the descriptors, the actual concrete, literal descriptors. It's harder for me to access that language. I can do it, but it's not my preference. I found myself once calling to my neighbor in Pennsylvania. I needed to borrow a wrench, but I couldn't think of the damn word. So I'm just calling, hey, do you have a thingy for turning thingies? And he's just looking at me like that could mean so many different things. Like, a thingy for turning thingies, because it was hard for me to access the actual concrete language, right? So this is a common thing.
Is this derived from the way language is described for NS types?
It does correspond to that, but again, if you know the Myers-Briggs, there's so many issues with that. Like, N and S in the Myers-Briggs is so misunderstood, misapplied. It's been bastardized from the original theorists that created it. This part does correspond to that, yes. Yeah. So with this, you'll see abstract language is shared with the catalyst and the theorist. They both use abstract language, but the catalyst tends to be more global, symbolic, and the theorist precise, conceptual, but still abstract, talking about conceptual pattern, like stuff like that, whereas the stabilizer and improviser both share a focus on their energy goes to concrete language, tends to be the natural preference. But in stabilizer's case, it's more detailed, sequential concrete language. With improviser, it's more general descriptive, but it's still that like more specific, literal, concrete, grounded language.
But when you're dealing with a theorist, and you describe theorists that often have a stack of science-oriented books, they're going to be extremely concrete in that dimension.
Most of the theorists I know, well, I mean, anyone can shift their language, of course, that's a skill, and the energy and preferences naturally goes to abstract. It usually takes work to shift that, including for theorists with their sci-fi. And not all theorists are into sci-fi, that's a stereotype. It's just a stereotype for a reason, but it's still a stereotype and it doesn't always hold, right? But yeah, it does take energy, but it is possible. You can shift your language. I can describe my house concretely if I have to. It's just not where I naturally go. Another dynamic has to do with a preference for affiliative versus pragmatic roles in any kind of like work setting or project. Affiliative roles are ones that are kind of naturally focused more on cooperation. There's often like a desire for people that prefer affiliative relating to want to get along and have agreement, to seek interdependence in work, seek roles that require a lot of interdependence with others. And this is an interesting point, sanction is a focus, wanting everyone to work within the norms or values of the group. So there's like kind of a wanting that work to be sanctioned in that way. Whereas those who prefer pragmatic roles tend to have a focus on autonomy over cooperation, doing what works, and wanting the kind of freedom to do that, and tend to seek more independent roles where they can work without having to have the interdependence of this. And instead of sanction, they tend to seek expedience. Right? They want to call the shots on own actions to meet goals, regardless of norms. So this is kind of natural pattern. So this goes over here, where the catalyst and stabilizer tend towards more affiliative roles, typically, whereas the theorist and improviser tend towards more pragmatic roles. So the last dynamic is attention, whether attention tends to go to structure or motive. Right? Structure is about the order and organization of things, some measure of control of some sort, the structure of it, the right, sequences, organization, they tend to ask about those things. Attention naturally goes to that. The organization of information or of the system or something. Tend to be comfortable with having clear order, clear structure to things, and detecting the details sometimes goes with that. Whereas the motive focus, attention tends to go first for people with that, to the why. Why do people do things? What's in it for them? Right, have a way to work with people. So it's kind of like, what's the underlying motive for people? And so the attention, instead of asking about the structure, the organization, the sequences, the attention tends to go about the motivations, what do you want in this? What's your goals in this? What's the purpose? Something like that. And they tend to be really comfortable with clear motives at play. Even if the motives are not necessarily aligned, at least they're clear and they'll work with that. And they tend to detect the purpose behind. So this shows up as the last thing, where the stabilizer and theorist both share an interest in structure, naturally, and the catalyst and improviser both have this interest in motives. And it's a little different in each case. With the improviser, the motive focus is what's in it for the person. If I know what's in it for them, I can figure out how to get them what they want and make this work, right? Whereas with the catalyst, it's for the deeper meaning. Like, what does this really mean to you? Like that level of motive focus tends to be natural. Whereas in the structure case with the stabilizer, it's more about sequential structure. What's the sequence of things to get to the results? And with theorist, it's more the conceptual structure of things. Oh, and I feel like I should add the one thing I I didn't give the parallel. I talked about how improviser tends to be very present-oriented. Stabilizer tends to be past-oriented in a lot of ways. The catalyst tends to be very future-oriented. That's part of the ideal. It's like living in an almost idealized future world. You pull towards that future. And the theorist tends to be almost out of time or infinite time horizon. It's more like defined things. It's like, oh, okay, in this specific time or whatever, here is the defined time horizon we're in. And sometimes it's just entirely out of time. It's just, it's hard to pin down in time with theorists. Which is,
Or universal.
Or universal time is another way of looking at it, yeah. Yeah, right. So anyway, that's that. If you're familiar with fast forward through this. If you're familiar with the Myers-Briggs, there is, here we go, sorry. There is a mapping, which I'll get to in a minute. But you have to be really careful, right? The Myers-Briggs has a high error rate, even when it's administered in the best of conditions, a really high error rate. So if you've taken the Myers-Briggs, MBTI, don't put too much stock in it. It actually doesn't work that well for finding best fit. Trust instead your own self-exploration, especially if you get the books and you do the work and you do the reading and you explore. That is more likely to get you to a better result, especially if you do it with somebody that knows what they're doing and can kind of talk you through it.
Especially reaching in for a lot of that exploration to other people who see you and trusting not just one person, but 3, 4, 5, and as many people as you can.
Totally.
Because oftentimes, especially what I was finding for myself, is that what I believe about myself is almost sometimes, in some cases, is quite the opposite, because that's the thing that I can see, and that other thing is just automatic for me. It's like the water that I swim in.
Absolutely. Yeah, getting those multiple data points really helps, especially from people that know you, love you, are close to you. Right? Get those data points, but also do your own reading, do your own reflection. The Myers-Briggs is one data point, but it's best held just like that. It is just one of many data points to find your best fit, right? So we have the 4 temperaments here. Last potluck, we did the interaction styles. So you have each of the 4 interaction styles with each of the temperaments. So 4 times 4 is 16 whole patterns. One of the books in my list is this brown book that describes each of the full 16 type patterns, which is more than the sum of the parts, right? Like my best fit is get things going, interaction style, catalyst in the temperament or essential motivator pattern. But if I read the get things going catalyst in this book, it's not just catalyst plus get things going. It is a whole pattern that adds up and has things in there that you can't reduce to either of those two. It's a whole pattern, right? So read that in there. And this does map to the Myers-Briggs stuff, but again, Myers-Briggs doesn't mean what most people think it means. It's looked at as a series of dichotomies, N versus S, T versus F. That is not what it originally was about at all. That's a bastardization of what Jung originally came from. That's not even what Myers and Briggs actually intended that instrument to be about. So watch out for that. That's a really almost a misuse of the original theory. It's unfortunately also the common use of that in the world today. Hold it lightly. These patterns are not reducible to those dichotomies at all. And if you dig into what was actually meant in that work or in the theory underneath of it, it's not an either or. It's every pattern using all of those processes in different ways and different orientations. So anyway.
I just got how much of a catalyst just for explanation.
Cool. So let me show you the mapping here. So if you have taken the Myers-Briggs, here is the mapping to give you some clue, right? So like if you've taken the Myers-Briggs and gone in, let's do mine, ENFP, that might be a clue to get things going catalyst, or it might be dead wrong, right? So hold it lightly, but it is a potential mapping. Right, so, and often it's, not totally accurate. So again, yeah, careful with it. Yeah, that's the map.
Would you be willing to entertain, and you can totally find answers though, but for those of us who weren't able to make the last time session, just like a high level overview of the 4, like if there's a way to.
I'm going to go no. I don't think it's easy to do that quickly, and I'm sensitive to how much time I've been talking, and I want to make sure you guys have time to chill and all that too. But it's recorded, so you can watch it and tell me like.
I noticed I have a place that I feel like I show up, but in relationships, I'm a different one, and in work, I'm a different one. Is there anything you can say to that?
So naturally people shift by their context, right? Like that happens all the time. We adapt to our local context. You act differently in different contexts. What you want to find is when the context exerts no pressure on you, when you don't have to adapt to the context, what's most natural, right? That might be a clue. What have you been the longest? Like what feels like early in life, like what feels like it's been consistent? What's home base? Right? That helps. And then what you'll often find is even when you adapt, like I can do lots of different energies, but when I do, they all have this get things going catalyst flavor to them, right? Like constantly. Like you can see that in it. And so that's another thing, but that often takes a little more practice with it to kind of see and look at. Yeah.
So the two big areas in the life of meaning and purpose and love and work, right? And how does the one knowing, okay, I'm behind the scenes improviser, like how do you then navigate the love and relationships and work?
Oh yeah. That's more than I can get into right now, but one of the things I love about this model, one of the things I love about it is that it does give so much insight for that. I use this all the time in navigating relationships, and usually as a dialogue, just as a conversation. Like I'll sit down with a partner and look at our best fit patterns and talk about which of this like resonates with us. And when we get into which I'm not going to do, but the other model I didn't get into, but you can buy one of the books on it, you can actually start mapping at a detailed level the cognitive dynamics between two types and like how you're likely to trigger each other, where you're likely to speak the same language or be tuning into very different things or whatever. So there's a huge thing you can do, but that takes another level of expertise to use it that way.
Then books are the best way to explore that.
The workshops are the best way to explore that of some sort, but books are the next best thing. Cool.
Thank you.
All right, awesome. Let me leave it there, and I'll post a link to the books. There's lots in there to dive into. So thanks. I had fun sharing this shit. Hopefully you guys enjoyed it too. That's it.
Did you make that slideshow?